Rock, you had a fairly long career. You had 49 professional fights, and you had won 43 of the knockouts. 49 fights. You were a pretty active champion, I would say. A pretty active heavyweight, as a matter of fact.
Yes, I started quite late, as a heavyweight or as a fighter, and had to really get some fights under my belt before I could fight for the title. I fought 16 times in my very first professional year. The following year, I fought 14 times, and then when I won the title in the following year, my fights slacked off. I had 49 fights in a period of 8 years, and today, if you've noticed that the fighters don't have half as many fights in that period of time. It's just become a very inactive sport.
Well, some champions, what, maybe once or twice is about all they'll defend their title.
Yes, I've seen where Floyd Patterson in 1 year only defended his title one or two times. Of course, Muhammad Ali was fighting quite often, but he was just fighting anybody. Frazier and Ellis, who are the two outstanding heavyweights at this time, are very inactive. They're not fighting enough.
Rocky, let's go back over your career. Can you take, just briefly, I know you had 49 fights like we were just saying, but how about just summarizing your career briefly for us from the beginning, and what got you started in boxing?
In the Army, it all happened in the good old Army. I was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, and we were out one Saturday afternoon at the gymnasium, and I had the gloves on with a pretty big, strong fellow, and I was able to beat him in the gymnasium with the big gloves. A major saw me and thought perhaps I had been a professional fighter. At least he told me that he thought that I had been around, and when I showed him that I hadn't been, he told me that I should take up boxing because I sort of looked good at it. And so I stayed with the sport. When I was discharged, I went back to my hometown of Brockton, Massachusetts. There wasn't too much fighting going on in the town, so I had to go to Boston, about 20 miles away, and started fighting there in the Golden Gloves. I entered the tournament and won it, and because I liked it so much and because it sort of came easy to me, I turned professional in 1949. And as I was telling you before, I had 15 and 16 fights a year there for the first 2 or 3 years. And then when I finally won the title, it tapered off, and I only had 2 fights a year. And so in an 8-year period of boxing, I had 49 fights. I enjoyed most of the fights. It was a great, great career for me. I'm proud and very happy to talk about it today, and sometimes I wonder why I was such an aggressive man in the ring.
How in the world did you fight 16 times in a year? That's a lot of boxing as compared to what we have today, when we're used to seeing champions defend their title maybe once or twice, period.
It does seem strange now. Times sure have changed from the 1950s, the early 50s. In the good old days of boxing, I call them the golden years of boxing, because TV was showing great fights twice a week, and the crowd was all for it. Boxing at that time was as popular as professional football is today. Just every week they were pairing up the best fighters in the country, and we had a viewing audience of about 80% of the nation. Fighters were very popular. Boxing was a prestige sport. It had a lot of glory to it. It was a big money maker, and I sometimes wonder how it all happened. Since that time, it happened all bad. But in those days, a fighter really learned his trade. I had fights to learn how to fight. It wasn't as we do it today, where a boy is brought along, he has a group of money people behind him, and he is sponsored by some wealthy people and brought along carefully and groomed until he is ready to fight. And then when he does fight, he is matched carefully, and he is being watched after by all of these very wealthy people. In my day, I had one manager, and this one manager managed about 30 fighters. I was only one of about 17 heavyweights that he managed, and it was up to the fighter to show well. He had to really produce, and so my manager didn't want to take any chances holding anybody back, and so he just kept us fighting. Sometimes we fought each other all over the country as many times as we could possibly fight, and it was in this way that I learned to become a professional fighter. But it was good for me, because I really learned while I was earning some money, and I learned how to become a fighter. It stood me well because in my 23rd fight, I was on television and I made a big hit in beating Joe Louis. And from there until I retired, it was just 3 solid years of fighting, making money, and getting ahead.
Rocky, Lewis, yourself, Moore, Charles, you were respected fighters and certainly well known. But you realize that when they started this elimination tournament for the heavyweight title, fighters like Martin, names like this that come into prominence all of a sudden, and I had never heard of them before.
Yes, you mean the computerized fights?
That's right.
Yes, that was quite a thing. You know, I was quite choked up with emotion when I was fighting Jack Dempsey in that computerized tournament, because I, as a youngster, never dreamed that there would be a day when this would even be thought about. The great Jack Dempsey.